what I find interesting about Kazakhstan is that to the southeast of Kazakhstan is a nation called Kyrgyzstan, which is actually where the US has been building up a lot of military bases. I knew somebody who was in US military and was saying that that's a very important region of the US armed forces, Kyrgyzstan, which is also right next to Western China, Xinjiang province, where the US has been trying to make accusations of genocide and saying that the Chinese government is systematically oppressing the Uyghurs. And also, not too far away is Afghanistan, which obviously the US occupied for over 20 years. And it borders Russia, it's close to Iran. So, Kazakhstan, like you said, Caleb, is very important to this chessboard that the liberal imperialist Western Empire sees as crucial to maintaining a wedge. It seems it's literally like a wedge between Russia and China. One of the things you pointed out a while back that I thought was really fascinating was that one of the comments that might have gotten Trump in trouble with some of the higher ups in the intelligence agencies was when he publicly said that one of our biggest mistakes as the US was to drive Russia and China together and to allow Eurasian development. So it seems like destabilizing this region, Kazakhstan, and Afghanistan, Western China will be so crucial to US imperialism. I find that really fascinating. By the way, if anybody has any questions for Caleb, please put them in the chat. I have one from Comrade Erica. She said, does Caleb have any thoughts on the Socialist Party of Kazakhstan? I also believe it's the socialist movement of Afghanistan has been supporting the protests. And I was looking at some research on the socialist movement of Kazakhstan. I saw that previously they were with the Trotskyist International. I found that to be really interesting. What are your thoughts on the left in Kazakhstan and in Eurasia after the Soviet Union? What are some of the splits, especially when it comes to like China and Russia?
Well, I attended the World Conference of Parliamentarians that was held in Moscow, and I actually met government officials from Kazakhstan, and I heard them give speeches warning about the danger of color revolutions and how social media could be whipped up for it. And that was before the pandemic. That was a while back. So they on some level, there was some knowledge that something like this might be in the future. But it's very interesting that the Communist Party of the Russian Federation has put out a statement. And from what I understand, they have said that on the one hand, they obviously condemn, the instability and the violence, but they want to separate it from the peaceful protests, about price caps. And again, Kazakhstan was once ruled by a communist party. I mean, it was a Soviet republic that had an official communist party, and many of the government officials, if not all of them, are people that have some kind of family relationship, or their parents were in that communist party, or they themselves were officials in that communist party. So Marxism is very influential there. Now, obviously, the Marxist groups, groups that are out there calling themselves Marxists, is a little bit different than the influence of Marxism. And that's one thing that I kind of urge leftists around the world to kind of make the distinction. But you're gonna in every country in the world, you have what you can call the revolutionary intelligentsia. And that's a group of people that are like college professors, young people, intellectuals, and they're usually from somewhat privileged backgrounds. And they get into anarchism or Trotskyism or some kind of revolutionary ideology that's more about aesthetics and emotions and libidinal release. And that doesn't represent everyone in the country who might want socialism, right? That doesn't represent everyone in the country who wants a better life. And you saw for yourself that in the Bolivarian countries, that's not, the base of Hugo Chavez and Maduro. That's not the base of Rafael Correa in Ecuador. So it's important to distinguish. You might hear a statement from some group that's aligned with the Fifth International or the Fourth International. That group probably has less than 1,000 members, okay? But the amount of people in the country that take Marxism seriously, that respect and honor the Soviet Union, that probably look up to Stalin, the bulk of those people are not involved with those organizations. And so you have to make that distinction.
That's a great point, because when I lived in Ecuador, me and Ophelia lived in Ecuador, it was a very interesting dynamic because a lot of the groups, exactly like you said, that had the name communist or Marxist or proletarian in the name, they sided with the right wing against Korea. There was a communist party that was led by a lot of private school petty bourgeois kids who were kind of anarchisty or Maoist, and they had signs that said "Down with Correísmo," who was Rafael Correa, the president, left-leaning, an amazing president, one of my favorite presidents. And they had a sign that said "Vote for Lasso." Lasso is the current president of Ecuador, who's a neoliberal banker from Guayaquil, from the coast, right wing as hell. And I was so confused because they had like hammer and sickles and red flags and all that. And it says vote for Lasso, down with Correísmo. And then they had like Marxists and communists and proletarian in their name. And then you talk to Correa's followers, the base of the Correa fan supporters, and they're taxi drivers. They're really working class people, and some of them even didn't have necessarily far left views. They viewed it in terms of development, very nuts and bolts. It was like Korea improved my standard of living. I'm making more money. I'm better able to provide for my family. They weren't even necessarily like these ideological Marxists talking about Gramsci and sipping lattes at a cafe. Like they were cab drivers, they were like street vendors, and they supported Korea. But the dynamic in Ecuador was that the petty bourgeois left, ultra left people, they saw them as right wing and Korea's right wing. But then they were left wing and they were in alliance with the neoliberal bankers. So I totally agree with you, man. We can't rely on labels and names. And I think a lot of times people get so fixated on that. They're like, oh, well, the Communist Party or the Socialist Party of this says that. So is that I'm a communist? So I guess they're right, but they're not. And I think that's definitely an issue, especially in countries that have already gone through the process of socialist revolution, where you have a lot more of those contradictions that take place. Same in Nicaragua as well. There's a group in Nicaragua called MRS, like the Sandinista re-innovation movement, that claims to be even more radical than the FSLN and the Sandinistas, but they're like pro-empire. So it's crazy. It's just it's really interesting to think about that. One other thing I wanted to ask you, Caleb, is can you talk a little bit about the differences between the current president? Because what I found interesting about Kazakhstan is that the former president Nursultan Nazarbayev, he actually ruled from 1990 to 2019, for a long time after the overthrow of the Soviet Union. And then the current president, Kasim Jomart Tokayev, if I'm sorry if I'm butchering it, he's only been president since March of 2019. Is there any difference politically between these two? And what are some of the changes you think moving forward that are going to take place in Kazakhstan?
Well, one thing I can just say about that, and I don't know enough about the specifics to really give a definitive answer to that. But when we see these presidents who've been in office a very long time, there is a tendency on the part of Americans to say, "Oh, that must be a dictatorship. Oh, that must be clearly someone's been in office that long. It can't be fair." But they forget that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was one of the most loved presidents in U.S. history. They've done a poll. The two most popular presidents in U.S. history are Lincoln and Roosevelt. Roosevelt, he got elected in 1932, and then he got reelected in 1936, and then he got reelected in 1940, and then he got reelected in 1944, and then he died. Right. But people had no problem voting for him again and again and again and again, because he kind of represented this kind of populist push against corporations and bankers, et cetera. And they imposed term limits to prevent another Roosevelt from ever coming back in the United States. And that often leaders who do represent the will of the people and have a kind of a relationship with the people, like like a Juan Perón, for example, or a Fidel Castro, where they really have the pulse of the people. They know what the people want deep in their heart, and they are able to articulate it. Kind of what was expressed in the very important book, The Role of the Individual in History, by the father of Russian Marxism, Yuri Plekhanov. When an individual who comes along who articulates what the masses want and kind of has their thumb on the heartbeat of the masses, when they come along, often they will stay in power for a very long time. And that often it is that kind of dynamic personality that makes it so hard to defeat them. And that's what the ruling class is very afraid of. After Roosevelt here in the United States, they passed term limits. And so then, there was a famous interview with John F. Kennedy. And John F. Kennedy was asked on one of these late night talk shows, do you believe in term limits? And he said, sure, I believe in term limits. And my brother Bobby, he also believes in term limits. And my brother Teddy, he also believes in term limits, and that the Kennedys, yeah, there were term limits, but they were a family brand. And that may have been why Kennedy ultimately was removed from the presidency, in Dallas, Texas, because even though he himself couldn't get reelected more than one time, he still represented a potential brand, a political brand that could kind of give voice to some of those sentiments. And like Roosevelt, he had aligned himself with the mass popular movement. So, you look at that, and people want to look at that, and they want to say, oh, see, it's a cult of personality. See, it's a dictatorship. This guy was in office for so long. I wouldn't put it that way. I don't see it that way. I think that, and especially in countries that are developing, people want the security of somebody who can deliver over a long period of time, and that a lot changed during those years. Putin really reversed neoliberalism. Putin started moving the world away from neoliberalism in that part of the world. And the fact that he aligned with Kazakhstan's leadership in order to do that brought a new level of stability to the country. Russia's economy got better, and then Kazakhstan's trades primarily with Russia. Things got better for them. China continued to expand. I think people probably saw living standards get better under that leader, and so they probably went out and voted for him once again. And in our kind of liberal Western mindset, where oh no, you pick a new one every 4 years, and it's a little bit of a different when a country is very underdeveloped and people are just getting electricity and just getting running water and just rising out of poverty. The mindset is a little bit different than our kind of, people joke about American political idol in the United States, where we have a new season every election and we're looking for, whichever reality TV star, makes us smile the most. People's attitude is a little bit different. They want somebody who will get in there and deliver the goods. And if somebody's been doing a good job and things have been getting better, they say, don't change horses midstream. They say, let's not upturn things. If this guy did a good job, we'll keep him in there. So that's kind of my thinking on that.
Most definitely. And I find it interesting as well, because the countries that in Central America that exemplify that perfectly, Honduras and Nicaragua, you have Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega, who has been president for many years, just was inaugurated as president of Nicaragua. And every person I spoke to in Nicaragua, I'm sure you had this experience as well when you were out there, was like, we don't care if he's there for 20, 30, 40 years. Like, he's our leader. He's our commander, Comandante Daniel. And people want that security and stability. It's kind of like, imagine if you're on an airplane flight, and every hour you're on a flight from New York to LA, like a 5-hour flight. And every hour there's like a new pilot, that would kind of make you a little bit uneasy, right? Because you're like, okay, maybe the next one doesn't know what he's doing, or there's no communication. Honduras, which neighbors Nicaragua, has supposedly a new president every 4 years, and it's horrible. It's one neoliberal puppet after another. Hopefully now things will change with Xiomara Castro Zelaya, but we'll see. And I definitely agree with you. I think that this understanding of democracy being when you have a new leader every 4 years is complete nonsense. And I think that we're moving toward an era where populism is becoming more popular. And I think, like you say in a lot of your streams, the left wing has to take back the mantle of populism and bring it back to the masses. Because from what I've seen around the world, populist leaders, people who speak for the working class, regardless of whatever cultural views or social views they have, if they speak to the material needs of the masses, those are the people we have to pay attention to. And I feel like this points to a broader discrepancy and contradiction we're seeing, not just in the US, you talk about this a lot as well, but all over the world, where you have this divide between the cosmopolitan liberal leftists who only focus on social issues, and the politically incorrect, dumb, backward, working class people who are branded as right wing or reactionary, but have more of that populist sentiment and base. And I think in Kazakhstan, I see something similar happening. Is a lot of the interviews you have the people who are branded as kind of like dumb or working class people saying like, I support Russia coming in and Armenia and all these other countries maintaining order, and I support the Belt and Road Initiative. But then you have like the more kind of latte coffee shop leftists who are like, we want chaos. You just want to continue burning buildings and overthrowing stuff. And I think it's a division that's happening globally. And I find that really fascinating.